Hey, well, welcome to the X Podcast. We're so excited to have you. I don't even know what episode it is. Should I know that if I'm hosting?
It's
What is like 78?
48?
No.
No,
we're in 60.
68.
Something like that.
Like
Anyways, welcome to a new episode, and we're back on video.
We're here.
We're on video this time. And so I've got my good friend Russ with me, which, by the way, just arrived in town from
Detroit.
Why'd you get stuck in Detroit?
I don't want to talk about it.
You know what?
But it was a few days.
Can I give the reason that you told me?
What was the reason?
When
I didn't tell you a reason.
You told me enough. When you
Did
were
I?
Yeah, last night, and I was like, because when are you gonna get back? And you're like, I missed my flight, and you were mad, and you only said 2 words.
Okay, listen.
You said terminal confusion.
Okay.
Terminal.
Listen,
When I hear terminal
Okay.
confusion, I went the wrong way.
Okay. All right. Fine. We're gonna talk about this for a second. So I spent 2.5 days in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Got to be with our friend Joel.
Joel was on this podcast.
Yeah. He's an entrepreneur. Has a church plant, and
Yeah.
you brought him out here, and we got to go, and I got to be your ambassador, your delegate.
Yes, that was fun.
To go spend time
Send
with
you.
them and speak and bless them. But then I immediately flew to Raleigh to do some leadership stuff there for a few days with friends, and then had a connecting flight back.
Yeah.
Apparently, Delta can fly straight from Columbus to Atlanta or Raleigh, but not back. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really tough. So I landed in Detroit.
Yeah.
This part's my fault. I saw Cat Cora restaurant. Are you familiar with Cat Cora?
No.
They have one in Disney World.
Cat Cora?
It's called Cat Cora. She's like this famous. It's like they're really nice.
Okay.
And I was like, oh my god. But I was like, I have an hour, and I asked the lady, the host. I was like, I don't think I would make my flight. She goes, oh, you absolutely would, because I was in Terminal A, and the gate that I was going to be flying back to is B-21. So I was like, oh,
That can't be far.
well, that won't be far. So, as long as you're there 20 minutes before the flight, 25 minutes, whatever. So I get over, I start walking, past A. I'm at like A21, and then I see something as I keep going past the walkways. I see that it goes all the way to A80
Before you get to B?
before you get to B. So I'm like, oh no. So I'm running. I'm running. I got a
laughing.
new hat, and it's got like a sweat ring on it.
Oh, no.
You can see it's. So I am running. I get to the end of A, and it's a dead end. And I was like, oh my God, it's on the other end. So I'm telling you, it took me 10 minutes. So for another 10
There was
minutes.
no signs that ever said B terminal this direction.
No. So I run another 20 minutes. I mean, no, I'm running probably in all real like 10 minutes. I'm like on a 10-minute run with my backpack. My back is
Sprint.
raw.
Yeah.
It was like bleeding.
my
Too much
gosh.
information. I'm running all the way back from A78 all the way past A. Guess what? It's another dead end. I grab one of the people behind this. I said, where is B? They said, oh, we know it's a little confusing. When you go back to A36, there's a slight sign up top that shows you there's a little corridor that goes towards B and C.
Yeah. So you missed
So I missed.
So here's
I
the
ran
moral of the story. Even when there's a sign, it might not help.
It was a well-hidden sign.
Well,
I was so mad.
So you made it back.
I made
You're
it
a
back.
little bit late.
Yes.
And we're glad to have you back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you back here at
It's good to be back.
staff. Right before we're recording this right before the death apocalypse is due to
I
hit.
hear there is a big
It's-
storm coming.
I don't think it's going to be that big. That's just my opinion. I might be wrong.
Are we having church this Sunday?
Yeah, we're having church.
Okay.
It's going to be over in a day. I mean, we'll probably get some ice
Thursday
and
to
snow.
Friday?
Thursday to Friday.
Okay.
It'll be clear by Friday afternoon. That's
Okay.
my guess. That's my prediction. But I'm not a weatherman.
You look like you've been taking creatine.
I'm not a weatherman. Well, I just started back into creatine because I told
Okay.
you that, but I
Oh.
don't feel like I look like. I
Oh,
don't-
okay.
I took creatine and I don't feel like it did anything except making me pee all the time.
Did you start lifting weights?
I've been lifting
Oh,
weights,
okay.
but made me pee all the time. And I don't think it didn't make me any bigger. Creatine's supposed to make you bigger.
Yeah, it's supposed to make you bigger if you combine the right diet. But I feel like you have 0 carbs and you never eat, and you also
That's
never
not
have
true.
water.
Not true. I've actually been enjoying plenty of carbs lately.
Okay.
So enjoying them. Anyways,
Then you get
so
Tommy
you know
Dawson
what
back
else
on.
is exciting coming up? I
What's
wanted
that?
to talk about this just for a brief moment. Maybe we'll see where this goes. The Olympics.
Come on.
They're getting ready to start. Winter Olympics. In fact, I think there's already an event that started now. They have some events, I think, that start before the opening ceremonies.
Bowling?
No, curling.
Curling.
Something in curling, I think, started already. That's what I heard. I think maybe today. And I think opening ceremonies is, let's see, it'll probably be the day before this releases. So I think the opening ceremony is February 3rd
February 3rd.
in Beijing. And so, will you watch a lot of the Olympics? You won't. Will you watch any of the Olympics?
If I'm at someone's house.
That's it.
Who's going to Beijing? Our ambassadors are like boycotting it, right?
I don't know.
Our delegates are.
I don't know.
You know that? Our delegates are.
The Beijing, I'm sure, probably. It's been a hotbed of controversy.
Yeah. A lot going on in the world.
There is a lot going on in the world. And so we're about to have the World Games. And what's interesting, I was thinking about this. What's interesting is that the World Games, the idea of having the Olympics, I think first started, World Games, there was, if I recall, I could be wrong on this. So any history buffs, you might correct me. But I thought originally a lot of the World Games kind of started and there was an agreed upon thing that there would be peace during the time of the games. And that even if there was war and conflicts and things going on in the world, that there would be peace for people to stop and participate in kind of a friendly competition thinking worldwide. Now what's interesting is we have the Olympics starting at the same time World War III is about to start.
Yeah.
So I found this kind of a fascinating contrast.
It is.
That the Olympics, where you're going to have Russian and Ukrainian athletes competing against each other in very civil games. At the same time that Russia has been building up massive troops, ground force right along the border of Ukraine. And it looks like we could be staring at possibly a massive war, not just between two countries, but because of the connections. U.S. is involved, a lot of Europe is involved, sanctions, all these kind of things. And I'm just curious, are you nervous about what might happen?
Well, first of all, I think that it is weird that we have the games and then we have people already protesting, or not protesting, but not going. It's weird because, like you said, there's always been kind of this ceasefire in a sense of we're all going to at least enjoy, if nothing else, but to celebrate the competition, to celebrate the athletes. But we're also in cancel culture now.
Yeah.
And we're also on the brink of potential Armageddon.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It is very, it's weird to watch. It's eerie to watch.
It's probably
I saw
a little
something
weirder for you because you're younger than I am.
Yeah,
so I
you
feel
were like 50 when the Berlin Wall was torn down.
I was a kid, but I remember just not to cut you off, but I was just thinking, like, you probably don't really know a time where Russia was really considered like our primary enemy or threat in the world.
Yeah, but you know what? I feel like
in the 80s.
Yeah, so I was not alive. I was born in 84.
So you were probably a little young, but I mean, the whole Reagan-Gorbachev like standoff Cold War thing, like in the 80s, late 80s, I mean, it was always on the back of your mind that we could be invaded by Russia.
Yeah, so I was not aware. I was not old enough to be aware during the Cold War. But I do feel like since then it's been a chilly battle.
Yeah. Chilly battle.
You know, like
not
I feel
a Cold
like,
War, but
yeah, I feel like my whole life there's been these simmering tensions.
Yeah.
There's always been it's been like, okay, I mean, you know, in the last 7 to 10 years, you got the rising monster of China. But really, all along, other than like just our blatant, you know, want to kill us enemies of North Korea or Iran or whatever, it's been like Russia. Is that one that we
it almost has felt like a passive aggressive relationship with Russia.
Passive aggressive.
Right? Like
these two giants that don't really want to stir each other because they know what would happen.
In Russia, really, in the 90s, I mean, they were toppled significantly when the Soviet Union really crumbled. I mean, because my wife's parents were missionaries over in Russia. We got to go over to Russia in '97, and
we give to Russia,
and we've given our church does to support some of the churches. We don't just give to Russia as in the Federation, but I just want to clear that up. Our church supports. We got people in our church that support churches and ministries in Russia. Anyways, let's clear that up. We give to Russia, okay, and but like. With the downfall of the Soviet Union in the 90s, they actually experienced such political and financial fallout. And so Russia, like, they were struggling financially. But one of the things that's been interesting is just to see what the prime minister, now president, has done over the last 20 years that has actually positioned them back to being like a world power. The way they have sold off a lot of their resources and gas and oil, and the way that they have continued to develop their missiles, their army, their whatever. Like they've positioned themselves to kind of back into this.
Well, and
global
Putin
threat.
has, in that same vein, postured himself as more and more of a dictator.
Yeah,
he's been
20
in
years in leadership.
He's been in leadership 17 years, and the way that he set it up, unless he changes the laws again, he'll be in leadership till 2036.
Yeah,
it's a long time.
Yeah,
if he's still alive.
Oh yeah, and so he's dictating what's going on.
Oh yeah, and we
Russia,
obviously are finding out, just like China, that he doesn't tolerate dissidents.
No,
KGB will straight poison them.
Yeah, yep. So there's a lot going on, and now you see this tension between Russia and Ukraine, and I've never been. I feel like the world has shifted so much due to the internet and social media over the last 10, 15 years, really the last 10, less than that. If you really look at everybody jumping on to a global platform where I was telling you this earlier, we hear and see what is happening in real time.
Yes.
You know, long time ago when things like this would happen, you would hear about it through a newspaper article. You'd hear about through something, but it would take time. So you felt kind of removed. Now I think it's so in front of us, and now through social media, the same thing's going on with China and over in Taiwan, and same thing with Beijing. Like all these things, that it almost feels like any kind of conflict in a different region of the world is now a global issue.
Yeah.
Like everybody has something to say. Everybody's weighing in on it, and there are accusations and things being thrown. Whereas, like, let's face it, like sitting here in Columbus, Ohio, I don't have a whole lot to do with the geopolitical landscape over in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
But now everybody has a thought or opinion, so I'm curious what yours are.
Yeah, it's crazy because it's like, were you asking me or you?
Yeah, but go ahead. You can say.
No, I'm
just in general.
I was listening to kind of this analyst, not futurist, but an analyst the other day that was just talking about trends and human psychology and just what's been happening lately. And they mentioned this thing that we all know, that we're more connected than we've ever been before. They used an interesting analogy. They said, it would be, in fact, I thought this was really, it sounds simple, but really apt. They said that the world's always been complicated, but now it's complex.
Yeah.
And so crisis falls into crisis. Like right now, there's production shortages because of magnesium levels, and they're shutting down coal plants in China because there's geopolitical fallout with Australia, and there's all this. Every crisis falls into a crisis, but then also we're more interdependent, and interconnected, and we get both the pros and the cons.
Yeah.
So if you're in a city, especially, you could taste the flavors of the world within your block, and you could really experience anything in the world. But the closer we are to each other in the world, the closer we also are to each other's problems.
Yeah.
And he said it's almost like when you think of the internet and you think of the way we're interconnected. I heard someone give this analogy. They said it'd be really probably complicated if you were to throw a party for 500 people that you kind of know, acquaintances from your city, your town, your church, whatever, to come over to your house.
Yeah.
They said, but it would be complex if you had 5,000 people from all over the world.
Yeah.
Different languages, ethnicities, religions, ideologies. And so that's what we're interacting in. And so things are happening in real time. We're hearing people's opinions and people's takes in real time.
Yeah.
Everything's affecting one another. It's really, really interesting to watch. And as far as Russia,
do you have a feeling toward Russia?
I do.
Or like, what's your feeling?
So again, I'm very.
You may not be educated, but it can be a feeling.
Yes, I'm not educated, so I feel like not nearly as well similar to when we talked about Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
Like I want to preface, like who am I to say
Talking
anything?
about,
it's just
they've been fighting and conflict for centuries.
It's way more. It's easy for me to say from an outside.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But I think the feeling is you look back at it and you see, what was it, in 2004 that...
Talking about Crimea? 2014.
Well, no, 2014 they annexed Crimea.
Annexed Crimea.
But when was it that Ukraine actually receded?
Yes, I think it was 2004.
It was 2004 they actually receded.
There was a time where they kind of agreed on some things, and Ukraine actually pulled back on some stuff, and they...
And so the reason they receded... And so I always like to think, okay, try to put my, because my obvious empathies go towards Ukraine. But I'm trying to think, it'd almost be like if Texas finally receded.
Yeah.
They'd probably be like, okay, who the heck do they think they are? But Ukraine secedes from Russia because they want to pursue more Western ideology, democracy. They want, and then at some point they elect a president that had Russian loyalties and wants to start pushing that. So Ukraine removes him,
that person,
and then in response, Russia comes in and just annexes
Crimea. So like, and if you read about it too, kind of unmasked, these, well, I should say masked, but unclear like who they were, but most believe really Russian, pro-Russian people come in and attack and take over government buildings in Crimea. That basically they flex, and Ukraine just backs away. They're like, okay, you can have it, which you got to imagine Crimea being right there on the Black Sea. They wanted that access to the Black Sea. And there was lines that were drawn there, and there were some international waters in between them, but they just kind of came in and said, nope, they flexed and said, we're taking it.
So it almost seems like the same grievance cycle that you see with Israel and Palestine. Because probably Russia still has grievance because they believe that Crimea belongs to them. So they're like, this is part of Russia, and here are these rebels. They're taking up resources. They're dividing our nation. They're hurting us. And anytime that this rebel that is seceded from us builds up any amount of arms, or anybody builds up their arms, that's as a perceived threat. They perceive that as a direct security threat.
Well, and they supported Georgia. So they didn't really, but when Russia and Georgia were fighting, you remember that? That was when Russia and Georgia were fighting, they tried to say that Ukraine was supplying arms and to the Georgian people and fighting in it. Later, council kind of third party came back council and said that wasn't true. They didn't say it. And so there's just a lot of stuff being thrown in. I remember when I think it was a pro-Russian group within Ukraine. That's at least the way it's been. Again, this is what people argue over, and this is why you get into geopolitical conflict. Remember, took down that airliner several years ago that killed hundreds of people, and these are just innocent people flying over Ukraine's airspace. And all these things. It's like are these things the underlings of war about to happen?
Well, and I think what's tricky too is you have to there's the people of a country, and then there's I heard somebody say the other day, they said when you travel the world, you become convinced that people can get along, governments just can't. But it is really hard because, and I heard somebody else say, one of the things that I think is a blind spot for Americans is when you grow up in most other nations, you grow up and you see when America's both the good guy and the bad guy. And I can't remember the anecdote, but they talked about, it's kind of well known that in other parts of the world, there's a little bit more of a nuanced understanding that sometimes your nation's the good guy, sometimes they're the bad guy. I think
we think we're always
as Americans
the good guy.
Tend to only think we're the good guy. So I try to remind myself of that, and I try because it's easy to have caricatures in your mind, but I'll be honest, and I'm not saying this is an intelligent approach, intelligent way, but it is really hard for me. If you're just asking me how I feel, not even what my intelligent analysis is, it is hard for me to shake off the caricature of Putin. I mean, this is a guy that you look at his eyes.
I've shirtless picture of him on his.
Well, and I've watched him. I go on weird rabbit trails. I remember halfway through last year, I watched all of those interviews they did. What was the former Fox News host?
No.
Kelly, I don't know. But anyways, and he's just coldness in his eyes, unapologetic. I joked about the KGB, but that's where he comes from. The KGB,
KGB still in operation.
He operates in that mindset. He comes from that. The way he approaches things, the way he manipulates things, and it's well known. Sure, we've lied at times, so this is with an understanding that America's not perfect. But I just think it's just: is there any country as large as Russia that's besides North Korea and all that is well documented in they will lie, deny, cover up.
Propaganda.
And so for me, to have 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine, and for years just deny that they're doing anything, or to straight up like invade a place but then kind of deny or kind of say, oh, that wasn't us. Like I just for the outspoken critics to disappear, oh, that wasn't us. Like I just feel like, and again, this is what I hear as an American, but it is really hard for me to shake off the caricature of Putin and therefore the way I view what the Russian government does.
Yeah.
So I could be way off.
Well, and I think we don't understand. From what I understand, if you're curious about what I've read about the conflict that's going on right now, I think it stems a lot over Ukraine's desire to connect with the European Union. So they have expressed for a long time wanting to be
Russia
a part
said
of
it's
the
a
European
red
Union.
line if they join NATO.
Yeah, that's what they said. And the reason being is that I really believe Russia sees them partnering with, they think that allies that could be their potential threat or enemies would then have access to a neighboring nation right there. So they see it as a national security issue. Like just a red line for them to, and so it would not surprise me, and I have no idea what's obviously in the head of Putin and what they're doing, but if you have current leadership, and we've seen this before, who are wanting to connect with the European Union and the NATO, maybe the thought is, well, let's just go and change the government,
right?
And put somebody in there that won't be. It's hard to know, but I find it fascinating just because I think we all. Everything, the globe has never been smaller, so everything that happens, it feels like it happens a state away. Yep. Not 7,000, 8,000 miles away. It feels like it happens literally like, well, that could be in Kentucky. There's some conflict going on because you hear about it so much. And so,
did you see the? So I watched the live news conference today with the military commander.
Oh no, I didn't see that.
When I was traveling back,
Yeah.
for a solid hour, they asked him. I mean, because right now we have 8,500 troops that are prepared to deploy with NATO. And then we have our own troops, U.S. led, that are ready. We have,
the big challenge for me, thinking back to the last 20 or 30 years of conflict that we've been in, and I don't understand the complexity of the interest of all of these governments jumping in, but President Biden in the U.S. has said very much, oh, we're going to get involved. Yep. Like we're showing force, economic sanctions to Russia. If you go and invade, that we are going to retaliate. And all of a sudden, it feels like, oh, we're getting into another war,
right?
And a war that really does, I want to say, doesn't involve us.
Yeah.
But I may almost like it, and I don't know if we should feel this way, but almost as like a global superpower, that we maybe feel responsibility if there's any kind of conflict happening. It's in the world that we have to get involved to squash it.
Right.
And I feel like we've gone down this road. I can think of Iraq. I can think of Afghanistan.
Yep.
I can think of Israeli-Palestinian like conflict and all these things, which I understand Israel's our ally, it just. But I have mixed feelings about should we be jumping into, because this is how world wars start.
Yeah, it's so true. Like I'm looking at it again. Anybody listening, I am declaring ignorance. Yeah. Like this is something that even us talking about, even us deciding we're going to talk about this today. I think some of those things is important to talk about.
Right.
But I want to continue to educate myself on it. But it is one of those things that the little I have studied over the years, it's. I understand it's a big issue, but for it to be so important, because Russia has to know it's at stake.
Yeah.
Like, Russia has to know what they're doing is pushing the world towards war. We also have to realize we're pushing the world towards war. I kind of feel like for us, I could be wrong, but as far as our motive, I don't think it's just to get involved. I think part of it is to check the global power that is Russia. Yeah. But I also think, because I heard when they kept asking, they kept trying to push this commander. It was so funny. He was getting so frustrated. He said over and over again, as I said in my opening remarks, here's what I will share, here's what I will not share. And he just kept getting annoyed because they tried to push him. He said, I will not comment on any specific contingencies or what ifs or whatever. But he did say something really interesting when they were asking about, well, okay, what if this pushes someone to attack one of our allies? Yeah. And he mentioned Article 5. And he said, according to Article 5, of NATO, European Union, whatever, NATO, he said we would defend our allies. So what I'm saying is I also wonder if part of our commitment in these moments is not just what's happening here, but the understanding that we want to uphold the integrity, because one day, let's say North Korea attacks or Russia attacks, we want to uphold the integrity of the major Western powers to say, no, we're going to have each other's backs in case something really happens.
Yeah. And I'm sure it's very connected to that aspect of it, but it's just, I still think it's one where you still kind of, you have all these emotions of what you've witnessed for literally the last 30 years, going back from Iraq and more recent ones, and thinking, I've seen the results of what happens when we get in, for the impact on our soldiers.
The casualties are usually the proxy countries.
Casualties, and just a feeling of, like we had in Afghanistan, it's like, we're over here and there's no end to it. It feels like, almost like Vietnam. It's conflict you're getting into around the world that you start to question after a while and go, what does this have to do with us and with America? And the impact that it has economically, the impact obviously that it has on lives, military, and everything. But it's I don't know, it's a fascinating,
so what do you
fascinating
think?
thing.
Is there a clear bad guy, good guy?
I would plead too ignorant to know. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind
you
of with
feel
you.
like
The same.
Russia's a little bit the aggressor.
I feel like, but I feel like Russia is like the big mean brother of Ukraine that just kind of pushes Ukraine around. It can, because it has the resources, it has the size to dictate what it wants, and it doesn't. Again, the history of Russia and Ukraine is fascinating because they really come from the same people way back. And there are splits that happen through the 17th century and 18th century, and then you get into the 20th century, and there's just been a long history of trying to separate, and it's been kind of, like you said, complicated to try to separate the two countries, and they've kind of done that, but it seems the way it feels is it doesn't. This is why I think the perception is this. Okay, and from everything I've read, my perception would be Russia is absolutely the aggressor. Here's what I say: Ukraine is not trying to take any part of Russia.
Yes.
Ukraine is not trying to invade Russia.
That's the thought
Ukraine
I had this
is not putting
They're
troops
not the ones
over
trying
Russia.
to invade.
Ukraine is saying, we want to join the European Union and NATO. We want to be more connected to the rest of the European nations. We want to be a part of that. And Russia goes, oh, no, we don't want you to be that, because then that brings it closer to our front door.
Right.
And so, again, when I look at who is the aggressor, I don't think that's an opinion.
Right.
Russia's the one that's been building up their troops along the border. And Ukraine is following suit to try to protect. But and what's fascinating is that Russia really sees themselves as one of I think they have a very interesting mindset. I was reading this one. I don't remember what source. But I think Russia still sees themselves very much in the importance of ground fighting. I feel like America has shifted away from mass ground conflict. Like, we would rather go in with drones and with other things and soften places up and just send in people to try to do cleanup and whatever. And it doesn't feel like Russia's fighting that way.
They have an intimate fighting style.
It
and
is.
a lot of people, and they also have the terrain advantage.
Yes, and so it feels like Russia is one of those last, I want to say last, but they're not, but one of those last superpower, what's always been considered superpower. And they have large ballistic arsenal. I mean, they're one of the ones that have intercontinental ballistic missiles that can carry nuclear warheads. So this is one of the reasons why I think we are always watching what's going on there, and this is what gives me a little bit of concern of us getting into conflict with them. But they even though they probably have the technology to do that, it still seems like they're almost like, we're just going to line up and take you down. Okay. And you can't do anything about it. Yep. It just almost comes across
and I will say,
brash.
Putin has a very, like...
it's like, we'll fight you on the ground.
This isn't a compliment. Yeah. Putin has the whole, like, I don't care, down. Yeah. He's just like, I don't care. This is what we're going to do. Yeah. This is Russia. And, he's got to have some sense of concern for the rest of the world. But he just, he's cold.
He has concern for his nation.
He's cold. But I want to ask, so what do you think the percentage is, since we're talking about war? So 2 days ago, they did a poll in Russia on the likelihood of war. Yeah. And it was 25%.
Okay.
They interviewed, what war analysts, and they still said, this is 2 days ago, they still said if they were pressed, they would say unlikely.
Really?
What do you say? Which, if you had to pick a percentage, I mean,
it is really hard
Right.
just to imagine one day, one order given, and 100,000 troops just invading into Ukraine.
Yeah.
Like, it is really hard to
Right.
imagine. But then I also ask the question, is this just a show of force? You're
But-
moving and amassing that many all along the border? Is that just a show of force?
And the problem, too, is when there's so much tension, it's like a tinderbox.
Yeah,
One spark.
I know.
Not like in the British War where somebody fires a rifle and then all of a sudden.
Yeah.
But I mean, anything that, again, like you talked about, everything geopolitically so interconnected.
Yeah.
So
I
there could be-
don't know that I could even put a percentage. I mean, I'd like to think that maybe it's more of a show of force. Like, we warned you, don't join with these people, okay? Because we see it as a threat. We mean it, but I don't know if we really mean it enough to go to war. But here's what I would say: I'm not putting it past Russia.
we're positioning our troops for it.
We've already seen Crimea. We've already said I just wouldn't put. I
And you
wouldn't
do
put
know
them past
that
it.
we've been saying that we're putting troops there. We've been saying so far not for defense but to bolster.
Yeah.
But we just sent, is it Airborne Unit 6? We just sent a unit over there that is multifaceted. And they straight up said in the interview the reason we sent them there is because they can function in any arena and they're
Terrain.
versatile.
Yeah.
What he said without saying it is, if something were to go down, we have a group over there that can respond in any way.
Yeah, but how do you respond with some? You have a battalion, or not even that. You have, some groups over there, and they have 100,000 troops.
Yep. And right now we have
Tanks,
3,000.
It's. I mean, we're not there to fight that war by ourselves. But again, it just feels like Groundhog Day. Speaking of which, I believe today is Groundhog Day.
Is it really?
Yeah, February 2nd. That's the day we're recording this, anyways.
Huh.
The next Groundhog Day.
I don't know.
It's the day when Punxsutawney Phil sees his shadow, which he just did, and then we have 6 more weeks of winter. That's not a good thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So, anyways, oddly enough, but what I was trying to say, that was a total. But it
Also, happy Black History Month.
yeah, Black
I
History
saw the
Month is
coolest
also-
video. I got to show you later.
Okay,
Sorry,
it's
it's
nothing
off
to do with
topic.
it. Anyways,
Yep.
I just it feels like things that we have walked through before as a country, and so I don't again I always I can have thoughts and opinions, whether educated or uneducated,
Right.
or feelings. Doesn't mean I need to put them out there or share them.
Right.
Although we're doing it on a podcast, but we're trying to do it in a way that I'm not just putting remarks out on social media, and I'm not just putting something out there.
No.
I'm trying to say I don't really know,
Right.
but this is what I understand of the conflict, and
Right.
it's not to it's almost like everybody. It's almost like the popular thing today is that everybody should verbally sanction
Right.
whoever in the globe is doing something bad.
Yeah.
Everybody, and if you don't, you're not really. I just
Right.
remember that with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think
Yeah.
this is different a little bit for
Yeah.
America.
It is.
But I don't know. I just the bigger thing is like, are we on the edge of another war? I mean, we haven't really had a world war in 70 years, right? 80 years.
But you know
right?
what's
70,
crazy?
80 years last year, like world war.
I
Like,
wonder
there's
if
been
this is the
conflict.
thing. So, like before COVID hit, there were for decades articles, TED Talks, scientists saying this is so obviously going to happen.
Another world war.
No, COVID.
Oh,
A global pandemic. It's happened
Well,
all
Bill
throughout
Gates,
history,
yeah,
and everybody said it's going to happen again. Could this be the new thing that we've all been saying all along? It's bound to happen. That finally happens, and I hope it doesn't. And
you mean the war now? You're
I'm talking about the war, yeah.
Like it does. It feels like at some point we're gonna. have a
And
world
here's
war.
this is I mentioned this to you earlier. This would be maybe for another podcast, but I was listening to a futurist and analyst the other day talking just brilliant. He said that we are at the end of an era, and that right now as a globe in a society we are in the waiting room between eras. He talked about like when the Roman Empire ended and like Ice Age. Like it wasn't like Roman Empire ended on Monday and then this began on Thursday. There was an overlap. You still see vestiges, and he says we don't realize this now, but so
What's the era that's over?
this
What did they give
There-
something easy
there-
to put your head around?
there's a lot.
Well, just a single era. We need to call it the era of freedom, the era of peace in our world.
Okay, here's
the era of
I'll give you a
technology.
I'll try to give you a 1 to 2 minute thing of what he said.
Okay.
We in modernity have had this mental construct and assumption as we keep going that we've conquered the world and that things are going to get smoother and smoother, especially it was interesting him talking about this, especially from like 2005 to 2016, even up to 18 or 19. There was this feeling that you can go anywhere in the world. You can buy the same shirt from this company that you just saw on the other continent, other side of the world. You could Uber anywhere you wanted to go. We had conquered nature. We'd conquered space. We'd conquered. And so things were going to continue to get smoother and smoother and smoother. It was this whole thought of, because people always say, okay, how do we get back to normal? Or is this the new normal? Right. And he had this paradigm shift of, no, we finally left what was abnormal and we finally returned to normal. Because he would say, if you actually study world history, disruption is normal. The world history as we know it is geopolitical wars, financial upheaval, plagues, and pestilence. Mm-hmm. But we have had this deception and illusion. And he talks about, I've never thought about this. He said, if you look at most of history, he talked about Martin Luther, that had the Protestant Reformation. He was terrified to walk through a forest because a tree would fall on him or lightning would strike. If you look at one of the reasons John Wesley, the Moravians, looked up to him because he had this peace. Because for the majority of the history of humanity, there was this understanding, this feeling that we're so small. Yeah. And nature could crush us at any moment. Okay. But over the last 30 to 40 years, maybe you could say century, we felt like we conquered nature. Mm. We built malls where we walk along sidewalks and we assume we're going to be okay. And we have glass. We built, think about cruise ships. We built these enormous things that could go on the vast, terrifying oceans. The ocean for centuries and millennia terrified people. But we built these huge artificial environments, and we assume we're going to be okay. Yeah. And he said,
well, it's a false sense of security.
It's a false sense of security. And he said, what happened? He said, you know what the virus was? The virus was a return to nature. He said, before 2020, humans actually thought they had conquered nature. Mm. And they thought they had conquered.
Well, you think it's a wake-up call that we're not stronger than nature?
Yeah. Well, but not just that. Yeah. In 2020, we found out that we'd not conquered, because once we thought we'd conquered nature, by and large, we sought out to conquer human nature. Mm-hmm. But in 2020, we found out startlingly and painfully that we had not only not conquered nature, but we hadn't conquered human nature. Right. The riots, the racial division, everything else. And so his whole thing was, he said, you take that, then you take everything that's happened in the internet and the interconnectedness, and you see all these crises, and you see the way that mercury shortages and all these things are happening. He said, we're heading to a place where we are. He said the days of, he said in our minds, when we think of the future, when we think of disruption, we either have two settings in our mind. We either think of zombie apocalypse, on a roof, and we're stockpiling, or we think of just smooth sailing the way we've always been. Right. Life, we really, until the last 2 years, you and I, if we're in a developed nation, don't really have to think about a lot. Yeah. News is something.
We're pretty safe.
News is something entertaining to consume.
Yeah. It's good
but
for
it's
podcasts.
Not that way now.
It's good for us to sit on the podcast, and that's about it. We don't ever feel like we're going to be affected by it.
But now we are, and his whole thing was, he was saying, look, this is, again, something for another time, but there were several predictions he had that were fascinating. He said for the last however many years, the world has been American-led. Yeah. The predictions now are that in the coming years, it's going to be three-tiered. It's going to be America-led, EU-led, and China-led. Hmm. And he said that the predictions, especially as terrorism, internet terrorism, cyber attacks,
Russia's really good at that.
They are. So I never thought about it like this. He said, but that would be that would be almost as devastating as nuclear attacks now.
Yeah.
He said, So guess what's going to happen? Down. The predictions are that as interconnected as the world is, internet power is going to start being more regional. So there might only be certain internet regions where you can get on the internet in this Western sphere or Eastern. Whereas right now, if you're on Facebook not China necessarily, because
it'll close down.
It'll close down. He said
you won't be able to see everything that's going on around the world.
Think about this. There could be in the future months where Americans for 6 months cannot get on social media or the internet. Think about that. You're talking about.
I think it sounds like a good thing.
but think about this. We keep talking.
Maybe not internet.
There could be. They said there could be weeks and months water doesn't run. There could be. Think about all. We're excited about the future of electric cars. You're talking about electric cars
Do
stop
you
running.
Do you think this is a little? I mean, it may not. But this seems really extreme. I mean, because I understand
but
though
again,
power plants and all these things are run, and they're all run by technology. You get into that, you disrupt it. We saw some disruption. We saw disruption in fuel supply over this past year or so. Remember when I forget what it was, but I think they ended up saying it was Russian hackers that ended up getting in, and they ended up having to shut down some fuel supply companies. And so I remember down, I think it was actually down by South Carolina, things that there were places where there was lines of cars and the price for fuel was skyrocketing. People couldn't gas, and then panic sets in.
Yeah.
So
and again, their point was the person talking about this is like an optimistic.
Doesn't
Christian
sound like it.
leader.
That's for sure.
I know.
Mark Sayers.
You gotta,
doesn't sound like
Mark
it. Let's
Sayers,
say his name.
We gotta say his name.
He is not optimistic at all.
You got to read his book. He's been one of. In fact, I bought one of his books like 5 years ago. I need to read it. But he's one of the most provocative, deep wells. But it was funny. Halfway through it, Carrie Newhoff was like, "Okay, now I'm depressed. Let's talk about the good news."
Yeah.
So again, he is not dystopian. He's not alarmist. He's not like extreme. He's not a prepper.
So you need to start prepping based on what he's saying.
His whole point is, look, like we're not entering the zombie apocalypse. His whole point was, again, we're in the overlap of the ages. We're still. There's a lot that we're still going to take for granted. His whole point, though, is the more we move into the future, there's going to be less we're going to take for granted. We're still going to operate with a lot of our luxuries. There's still going to be great things, but the illusion now of COVID, of the world just going to keep getting smoother and smoother and smoother, and we're more and more and more in control of nature, whether biological or environmental. Like that illusion's been shattered.
Well, even what we see happening, just even natural disasters. I mean, everything. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that, we see a lot of natural disasters, and I think those are always reminders. Massive earthquake, and huge storms and flooding, and just like I was super fascinated. I don't think this has anything to do with it, but I was fascinated by the volcano that erupted out in the middle of in the Pacific. Over on the west side. Did you see that? You didn't see that?
Whoa, yes, I heard about it.
Yeah, I forget the name of the. I wish I had the name of the islands. They sound Hawaiian. The Filipino, over by there in the Philippines, but just a massive volcanic eruption, and I'm just fascinated by this stuff. So I was reading up all about it, and it was one of the biggest ones. So, and the volcano had been coming to the surface for a while. Had eruptions that happened before they had created islands. This one was so massive. They said it was the equivalent of 6 million tons of TNT going off and spewed things, elements and things, obviously, with everything that is spews with volcanoes, ash, and all that good stuff. Most of it as high as 19 miles in the air, some as high as 34 miles in the air. Covered some of the neighboring towns, neighboring islands, just wiped out the crops and everything like that, neighboring ones. And these were uninhabited, little island that had popped up because of the volcano. But what was interesting is you have something like that massive happens, and it also sends tsunamis, which weren't not devastating ones, but all across the ocean. So there's just my point is that there are things that are still happening in nature that we have no control over. And it's fascinating to kind of it is fascinating because you could probably, in my lifetime, you could probably go back and just go, okay, you can read up on history. We have been living in the most technologically advanced history. Probably, I know it's not, there's been conflicts, but not to the extent of World War. If you go read about the way world wars impacted the United States, World War I, early 1900s, World War II, 1939, 45. When you go read about those, they were all encompassing. I mean, they're changing what we're manufacturing, all this stuff. We've had conflicts, but for the most part, it's been hey, we're sending soldiers over there. We're doing this. It's not affected us. Obviously, obviously 9/11 did affect us on our property, and that kind of was an eye-opening thing, that could come. But it almost makes you wonder if that is not what we're going to see in the future, that we're going to see it's going to be different, the way it's being fought.
But you know what? And here's one, because I am a hopeless optimist. And one of the things that's really exciting, especially in our context, Mark Sayers pointed out, he said, is we always want to go back to norm so that we can do ministry and be leaders. He said, but the history of the world, he said when David was coming back from the ruins of Jerusalem, his whole thought was, how can I get things back to norm so I can implement these programs and they work well? his whole thing was leadership through everything that was happening. And this is like, I think,
Well, they say
actually,
leadership is born for diversity.
is born for diversity,
Right?
born for it. So this is the greatest. This could be one of the greatest moments in history, not only for the greatest minds to create the future, but also for people to find hope in a real way, and for the church to be the light in the middle of the darkness. One more haunting thought, though. So we were talking about this is, so you went to Israel.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we all went on the same tours, but I remember in 2017 when I went to Israel, this was one of those first moments, as far as even just speaking for us, the age of our nation.
Yeah.
I'm walking through some of the Roman ruins. Like, we're looking at like where some of the first like aqueducts were built.
Yep.
And our tour guide is Jewish, both in religion and nationality. And he's just very dry, very matter of fact. And he's spitting out stuff that I'm like, oh my God. Like he said the thing that maybe, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but he said, Israel knows that when America gets a cold, Israel gets the flu. So we don't realize this in America, the power, at least right now we have, the smallest thing that happens here has big ripple effects on the rest of the world. But then he made a statement. He goes, we were talking about the Roman Empire. And somebody asked, they said, well, what happened to the Roman Empire? I mean, it was so huge. It was vast. It was global. And he said corruption and decadence and bad leadership. And he said, the same thing that happens to every empire when they finally fall.
Yep.
And then he said this. He said the same thing that's going to happen to America. And I remember I was like, wait, what? And he goes, oh yeah, you do know that there's never in the history of the world been a world empire that succeeded 300 years. Yeah. And I was like, it all got quiet, and I'm like, whoa.
Roman Empire, I would say, is close to 400 or more. But but you can look at ours. And whether you say 1776 or you go back further.
And I was like, really? Do you think America will fall?
Yes.
He goes, according to everything that's ever happened in the world and the age the empires last, he goes, and by the way, he goes, do Americans are they not sobered by the $300 trillion whatever dollar debt we have to China? He goes, you don't think that any moment now that could cause your nation to collapse? And I was like, holy smoke.
I think I've told you this before when we've had conversations, whether it's, just conversations about the right to bear arms and other things. And I've said to you before, I said, we should not be so naive to think that the way it is now is the way it's always going to be. I said the exact same thing to you, though. I remember I said, you can go back and look at the history of global powers. They come and go. Sure. They really do. And so what does that mean for us? I don't know. It doesn't mean I feel like it doesn't mean we need to live in fear. And I think we've talked about this before. Where is that line between being prepared for things but not being a prepper, or, being prepared but also not living in fear in that regard? And I think if anything we've seen through everything that's happened over the last couple of years, I think that fear has become like this. It's kind of settled into our spirit a little bit. Yeah. And so I think that's a great challenge, is like, how do we look ahead? I also know that the future has never been written. Right. So the one thing is you look at history so you don't repeat it. Yep. And so if anything, we should be going as a nation, we should be going, there have not been global powers that have lasted much longer than this. What should we do? Well, let's go learn. If you do not learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat it, right?
There's this.
But I also think that the future hasn't been written. And there is always somebody or something that is going to change that narrative. I don't know. I'm not saying it's America.
This is an oversimplistic reduction, and I don't know that I fully agree with it, but the basic sentiment's kind of funny. Leonard Ravenhill once said, the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history.
No, we don't learn. I mean, that's true, though. We don't learn, and we just repeat it.
Yeah, and I think
maybe that's why we've seen that cycle.
Yeah.
Since humanity, I mean, it is interesting. I've been to a lot of countries that are way old. I mean, you got probably the oldest is going to Israel and seeing, stuff that dates back thousands of years. But even in Russia, I was there, and when they were celebrating their 850th anniversary. Yeah. I think it was. And so,
do you personally still give to Russia?
To Putin? What are we talking about? No, I don't. Personally give to Russian government. Anyways, but just being over there is kind of that reminder. Same thing in Europe, and I lived in Europe. But you go into these towns, you go into like Russia, and you're in Moscow, and it's they're like celebrating their 850, and you're it's that reminder, like, okay, this capital, this city is more than double, really, what America has existed for, and it's not even America as we know it there. Right. If you want to if you want to say 1776 or later. I mean, we only got a couple hundred years, and so you're looking at that, and then you look at them and go, "Hey, there was a time they were a massive superpower, and then there was a time when they lost and because of things, and now they're right. So I do think that
You know what I want to talk about
I think that's a reality that I'm not afraid of, but I think we should. I think if we are naive and think that nothing can touch us, that is when we're the most vulnerable.
Right.
And I think America could be vulnerable in the global landscape moving forward. If it doesn't, I don't know if there's anything we can do about it. I mean, I think at some point other global superpowers are going to rise, and how we interact and respond. But I wonder if it'll be. One thing that always changes it.
The only thing that we
is
need
a
to
war.
do.
But I mean, the one thing that always changes is a war. You go back and look, all empires and all these things. Usually, it's a war.
Right.
And somebody thinks I can't be beat.
Right.
They go into the war and they get beat.
The only thing we need to do to improve our nation is get out of debt, reform healthcare, reform prison system,
win the most golds,
and get out. Say what?
And win the most golds at the Olympics.
And win the most golds at the Olympics.
But
and unify the nation back again politically, and,
That's all we gotta
have
do.
a really strong leader that can step towards the middle and actually win with charisma and integrity. That's all we need to do.
We'll probably do it this year or next.
We'll do it this year.
Anyways, well, it's been a fascinating conversation. I'm not sure if it's been super helpful for anybody. But I think
it's good to talk about it.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think we've always wanted to do, just in this podcast, is talk about current events and what's going on, and how do I process that through my filter of my faith? How do I process that? And I think as much as you and I both work in ministry, and sometimes we're so involved in kind of that aspect of life that that we don't ever want to just like put our heads in the sand and go, well, this is our world and this is what we do, and not see what's going on in the big world and that we're a part of, because everything that happens in the world affects us.
And to pray for the world.
And to pray. That's I'm
convicted as I say it, because I have not prayed a lot about this.
Yeah, and like for example, I do. You're right. I find myself curiously watching what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. But I'm not praying for there to be peace or resolution, and you know what I mean.
You know the most on my seat I've ever been watching current history unfold was when everything happened with ISIS. Yeah. I remember I don't know if it was healthy or unhealthy, and I actually did pray. I remember I became consumed. Do you remember that time back in like 2015 to 2016? When ISIS was about, and especially for a few days, they were about to attack this town, and we knew any moment if they broke through that hundreds and thousands of women and children were going to be massacred. Yeah. And I remember thinking this is an eerie thing, because like I remember it became unhealthy. Like every few hours, I was like refreshing my news app because I was like, "What's happening?" Yeah, it's just we're in a weird time. Yeah. We're in a weird time because it's so far removed and so close.
Yeah. And I think the big key as we walk through it, and all these things we're talking about, you listen to futurists and other things, and it could cause panic, and it causes you to freak out. Yeah. And I think that's, to me, one of the things that I want to always remember, and this is what my faith really helps stabilize me, is realize that my life is founded on Christ and what He taught. And remember what Jesus said, once He said, you build your house on a rock, and when storms come, it'll still stand. Yep. You build your house on sand, and not so much. And so I think in all of the global upheaval that's going on, the shifting of power, the who knows the future and how it applies to us, I think that's one of the things that settles me. Yeah. I think if you don't have that, I don't understand how you aren't so unsettled in life. When you can look at, especially as things may get worse and things may get even more complicated and life may impact what we've known, I think there's a tendency to have fear and panic and freak out. No. But to me, that's one of the things that I can have conversations about these, be concerned about them, but they don't disrupt what is really holding me up. And that is my faith in Christ, and I know that He's with me no matter what. And so, and I look back to even in the Bible, and you see, what's interesting when you see that the hardest things that the early church went through also resulted in the greatest advancement of the kingdom of God. Yep. And when you see that in Acts chapter 8, verse 1, that a massive persecution broke out against the church, and then from that the gospel went to other regions, the things Jesus said it would do, all of a sudden you realize, even though we aren't in control of nature and we're not in control of global powers and we're not in control of all this stuff, I just feel like God is.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean, we might want God to rearrange and move things, but what I know is that I feel like God is just over it all, and he's going to use whatever happens in our giving us the ability to fight and not fight. And he's going to use whatever it is to advance his purpose on the earth.
Right. Yep.
And so I can take heart in that, and I can rest in that.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
Come on.
Fascinating conversation. Well, anyways, we just want to say thank you for joining with us for this episode. If it has encouraged you, we hope. If it has sparked something in your mind, if it has brought a question to your mind, we'd love to know. We'd love to know. If you have any thoughts about what's going on globally or who's going to win the most amount of golds in the coming up Olympics, let us know. We'd love to know. You can send us always an email to podcast@thex.church. We'd love to hear about, and as well, if this is something you think would help someone else, do us a favor and share it. We would love that if you could just, click the share button, share it through YouTube or podcast with a friend or a family member. And it does help get the word out whenever you would like it and you subscribe and leave a review. It does help. Moves up in the algorithm.
Come on.
Talked about the algorithm.
Let's do
So
it.
it moves up.
Rate
So
it,
anyways,
share it around.
thank you for joining us. And until next week, have a great day.